High in the mountains of Bolivia, nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, there is a place where the past seems to have been shattered. Massive blocks of stone lie scattered across the cold, empty landscape. Some are broken, some are overturned, and some are carved with a level of precision that raises a question that still refuses to disappear. Who built this? And more importantly, how? This place is called Puma Punku. To the untrained eye, it may look like nothing more than a field of ancient ruins. But look closer. The stones are not random. They contain perfectly cut angles, deep grooves, sharp corners, intricate shapes, and massive blocks that appear to have been designed to fit together like pieces of an enormous stone machine. Some of them are shaped almost identically, as if they were part of a system, a design, a blueprint. But here is where the mystery begins. These stones were created centuries before modern machines, before electric saws, before industrial tools, before cranes and engines. And yet, somehow, an ancient civilization managed to cut, shape, transport, and assemble enormous blocks of stone in one of the harshest environments on Earth. How did they do it? What tools could possibly have created these shapes? How were massive stones transported across the high plains of the Andes? And what did Puma Punku look like before it was reduced to ruins? For centuries, the answers have been buried beneath layers of history, speculation, and myth. Some believe Puma Punku is proof of an ancient civilization far more advanced than we have been taught. Others believe its builders possessed engineering skills that modern people have dangerously underestimated. And then there are those who believe something even more extraordinary, that the people who built Puma Punku may not have been the first, because standing among these ancient stones, surrounded by the silence of the Andes, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. These ruins are telling us a story about a civilization that rose, created something extraordinary, and then disappeared. But before we can understand how Puma Punku was built, we have to answer a much more important question. Who was here first, and what happened to them? The lost city in the Andes, high above the clouds, in the cold and unforgiving mountains of Bolivia, there is a place where history appears to have been torn apart. At nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the Andes, enormous blocks of stone lie scattered across the landscape. There are no towering walls, no intact temples, no grand palaces, only silence and stone. Massive pieces of stone, broken, overturned, and separated from the structure they once formed. This place is known as Puma Punku. Today, it looks like the remains of a forgotten disaster. But thousands of years ago, this desolate landscape was very different. Not far from the shores of Lake Titicaca, a powerful civilization once flourished here. A civilization that built monumental structures, organized thousands of people, and transformed one of the harshest environments on Earth into the center of a remarkable world. They are known today as the people of Tiwanaku. Long before the rise of the Inca Empire, before Machu Picchu, before the great civilizations that would later dominate the Andes, Tiwanaku was already becoming one of the most important centers in South America. For centuries, people traveled across the highlands to reach this place. They came from distant communities. They brought goods, they exchanged ideas, they participated in ceremonies. And at the heart of this ancient world stood a series of monumental structures unlike anything the surrounding landscape had ever seen. Among them was Puma Punku. But Puma Punku was not simply another collection of ancient stones. Even today, after centuries of destruction, something about this place feels different. Walk among the ruins, and the first thing you notice is the size of the stones. Some are enormous. Blocks weighing many tons were somehow cut, transported, and placed in this remote highland environment. But size alone is not what makes Puma Punku mysterious. It is the precision. As you move closer, the rough image of an ancient ruin begins to disappear. The stones reveal something unexpected. Straight lines, sharp angles, perfectly carved grooves, deep rectangular cuts, and shapes that appear to have been deliberately designed to connect with one another. Some of the stones are so precisely shaped that they almost look less like natural blocks of rock, and more like individual components of a much larger machine, like pieces of an enormous puzzle, waiting for someone to remember where they belonged. And perhaps that is the first true mystery of Puma Punku. What exactly did this place look like? Today, the ruins are scattered across the ground. A visitor can see enormous blocks lying far apart from one another. Some appear to have been violently displaced. Others are broken into pieces. The original structure is gone. Its walls have collapsed. Its purpose has been debated. And whatever Puma Punku once looked like exists now only in fragments. Imagine standing here centuries ago. The empty plains replaced by monumental stone structures. Ceremonial spaces filled with people. The sound of footsteps echoing across carefully constructed platforms. Priests, workers, travelers, and pilgrims moving through a sacred landscape built at an altitude where even breathing can be difficult. What kind of society could organize such an enormous project? Who planned it? Who designed it? And how many people were required to bring thousands of tons of stone into this remote corner of the Andes? The civilization of Tiwanaku clearly possessed knowledge, organization, and engineering abilities that allowed it to accomplish extraordinary things. But the deeper archaeologists study Puma Punku, the more fascinating the questions become. Because building something this large was only the beginning. The real mystery is hidden in the details. Among the ruins are stones carved into shapes that immediately capture the imagination. Some contain precisely cut channels. Others have deep recesses and perfectly formed corners. And then there are the famous blocks whose designs have become symbols of the mystery surrounding Puma Punku. At first glance, they appear almost unnatural. Not because they could not have been made by human hands, but because their geometry seems so deliberate, so carefully planned, so systematic. They do not look like random stones that were simply stacked together. They look like parts, components of a larger architectural design. And that raises a question that has fascinated researchers, explorers, and mystery seekers for generations. How were these stones made? What tools were used to cut them? How did ancient builders achieve such complex shapes using the technology available to them? And perhaps most importantly, how did these massive pieces of stone arrive here in the first place? Because Puma Punku sits high in the Andes, in an environment that would challenge even modern construction crews. The air is thin, the weather can be severe, the landscape is vast and exposed. Yet somehow, centuries ago, people moved enormous quantities of stone across this region and transformed them into something extraordinary. Something so ambitious that even in ruins, it still forces us to stop and look closer. But before we can understand the mystery hidden inside these precisely carved stones, we must first confront the impossible question of how they were shaped. Because the deeper we examine Puma Punku, the stranger the stones begin to look. And in the next part, we will step closer. Closer to the cuts, closer to the angles, closer to the strange geometric shapes that have convinced some people that Puma Punku was built using a technology far beyond what ancient civilizations should have possessed. But is that really true? Or have we simply underestimated the people who built it? The answer may lie in the stone itself. The day Puma Punku fell. For centuries, Puma Punku stood above the high plains of the Andes, a monumental place of stone, ceremony, and power. People came here. They worked here, they gathered here, and for generations, the structures of Tiwanaku must have dominated the landscape around them. But then, something changed. The civilization that created this extraordinary complex began to decline, and eventually Puma Punku fell silent. Today, the silence is almost impossible to imagine breaking. Wind moves across the altiplano. Dust settles between enormous stones. Grass grows around blocks that once belonged to carefully planned structures. There are no crowds, no builders, no ceremonies, only ruins. But when did Puma Punku actually become a ruin? And what happened to the people who built it? This is where the mystery becomes more complicated. There is no single ancient account describing the final day of Puma Punku. No surviving witness left behind a detailed record saying exactly what happened. Instead, archaeologists have had to reconstruct the story from fragments. The decline of Tiwanaku appears to have occurred over centuries, rather than in one clearly documented moment. And one of the most important clues may have been the environment itself. The Andes can be beautiful, but they can also be unforgiving. The communities of the Altiplano depended heavily on predictable water supplies and productive agricultural systems. When climate conditions changed, the consequences could be devastating. Evidence from the region suggests that prolonged drought played an important role in the decline of Tiwanaku. Imagine what that could mean for an ancient civilization. Fields begin producing less. Water becomes harder to find. Food supplies become uncertain. Communities become unstable. Political power weakens. People begin leaving. And slowly, a center that once attracted thousands begins to lose its population. But climate may not have been the only factor. Civilizations rarely disappear because of a single problem. Political conflict, economic pressure, social instability, and environmental change can reinforce one another. Eventually, a powerful society can reach a point where maintaining monumental architecture is no longer possible. And when the people leave, the stones remain. But there is another mystery. Look carefully at the ruins of Puma Punku. Many of the enormous blocks are not simply weathered in place. Some appear displaced. Some are broken. Some are lying far from where they might originally have stood. This has inspired dramatic theories about earthquakes or some enormous catastrophe. And the Andes are certainly a region where earthquakes are a real danger. But there is an important distinction between what we can prove and what we can imagine. There is no solid evidence that a single catastrophic event suddenly destroyed Puma Punku exactly as some popular stories suggest. The ruins we see today may be the result of many different processes occurring over a very long period of time. Natural forces, human activity, collapse, reconstruction, abandonment, and perhaps later disturbance. The site may not have fallen in one dramatic afternoon. It may have died slowly, stone by stone, generation by generation. And perhaps that is even more haunting, because imagine returning to Puma Punku decades after its golden age. The ceremonies are gone. The workers are gone. The people who understood the original design are disappearing. The enormous stones still stand, but fewer people remember why they were placed there. Then another generation comes, and another. Eventually, the purpose of the structures becomes unclear. The architecture remains, but the knowledge behind it begins to fade. This is how a civilization can leave behind something extraordinary, and yet become almost invisible to history. But there is another layer to the story. Long after the Tiwanaku civilization had declined, stories about ancient places and supernatural beings continued to circulate throughout the Andes. Stories of gods, stories of powerful ancestors, stories of beings associated with the creation of the world. And over time, these traditions became intertwined with the ruins themselves. To later generations, enormous stones could seem almost impossible to explain. How could ordinary people have moved them? How could they have shaped them? Perhaps the answer was not human at all. And this is where history begins to blur into legend. Some modern theories claim Puma Punku was built by a civilization far older than Tiwanaku. Others suggest that ancient people inherited knowledge from an unknown culture. And some go even further, claiming that the builders may have received help from beings that came from somewhere beyond Earth. But before we accept any of those possibilities, there is one question we must answer. What does the actual evidence tell us? Because beneath the legends, beneath the stories of lost civilizations, and beneath the whispers of ancient visitors, there is a real archaeological site. And its real story may be even more fascinating than the myths. The stones are real. The engineering is real. The civilization was real. But the mystery remains. Who truly understood how Puma Punku was built? And was the civilization we call Tiwanaku really the beginning of the story, or only the last chapter of something much older? To answer that, we have to go deeper into the most controversial theories surrounding Puma Punku. Who really built Puma Punku? So, after all the stones have been examined, after the ruins have been mapped, after centuries of history, archaeology, and speculation, we finally arrive at the question at the heart of the entire mystery. Who really built Puma Punku? The most widely accepted answer is also the one that may be the least dramatic. The builders were human. They were part of the Tiwanaku civilization, a sophisticated society that flourished in the Andes long before the rise of the Inca Empire. They understood agriculture. They organized large communities. They built monumental architecture, and they possessed an impressive knowledge of stone construction. There is no credible archaeological evidence proving that an unknown supercivilization built Puma Punku. And there is no reliable evidence that extraterrestrials came to the Andes and taught the Tiwanaku how to shape stone. But that does not mean the mystery disappears. In fact, it may make the story even more impressive, because perhaps we have been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, how could ancient people possibly build this? We should ask, how much were ancient people actually capable of achieving? The Tiwanaku did not have modern cranes. They did not have computer-controlled cutting machines. They did not have trucks carrying enormous blocks across the landscape. But they did have something that modern technology can sometimes make us forget about: human organization. Thousands of people can accomplish extraordinary things when they share a goal. Workers can quarry stone. Others can transport it. Specialists can shape it. Architects can plan it. Leaders can coordinate the entire operation. And when that process continues for generations, monuments can emerge that seem impossible to people looking back thousands of years later. The precision of Puma Punku may not require a lost machine. It may require lost knowledge. Techniques that were refined through experience, methods of measuring, methods of cutting, methods of polishing, methods of moving heavy materials, knowledge passed from one generation to another until the civilization itself disappeared. And perhaps that is the real tragedy of Puma Punku. The stones survived. The knowledge did not. But there is still an important mystery. We do not know every detail of how the entire complex was constructed. We cannot simply look at the ruins and reconstruct every stage of the original project. Many stones have been displaced. The site has been damaged over time. Some structures were altered. Others were destroyed. And the original appearance of Puma Punku remains partly hidden beneath centuries of change. That uncertainty created the perfect environment for legends. The more mysterious the ruins became, the more extraordinary the explanations became. Ancient astronauts, lost civilizations, forgotten technologies, visitors from the stars. These theories are fascinating because they offer simple answers to difficult questions. But fascination is not evidence. And when we separate the mythology from the archaeology, something remarkable remains. A real civilization, living in one of the highest inhabited regions on Earth, managed to quarry enormous stones, transport them across difficult terrain, shape them into complex architectural components, and build monumental structures that continue to fascinate us centuries later. They did it without the technology we have today, but perhaps that is precisely the point. Puma Punku does not necessarily prove that ancient people possessed technology beyond their time. Proves something much more interesting, that the past was not primitive in the way we sometimes imagine it. The people who built these structures were engineers. They were planners. They were craftsmen. They were problem solvers. And they were capable of transforming an enormous amount of human effort into stone. So perhaps the greatest mystery is not who came from the sky, but what happened to the knowledge of the people who stood here before us. How much did they know? How many techniques disappeared when their civilization declined? And how many ancient achievements are still waiting to be understood? Today, Puma Punku remains silent beneath the vast Bolivian sky. The people are gone. The ceremonies are gone. The original structures are mostly gone, but the stones remain, and every groove, every angle, every carefully shaped surface is a fragment of a story that tells us the ancient world was far more sophisticated than we sometimes give it credit for. Maybe Puma Punku was never built by aliens. Maybe there was no lost supercivilization. Maybe there was no mysterious technology hidden beneath the Andes. Maybe the answer is both simpler and more extraordinary. Human beings built it. And perhaps the real mystery is not how they did the impossible, but how much is still possible when we finally understand what they knew. Because thousands of years later, we are still standing among their stones, still asking questions, and still trying to remember how they did it. Puma Punku has no voice, but the stones are still speaking, and perhaps we simply haven't learned how to listen.